Billionaire CEO reveals the surprising wisdom of a janitor. Her touching advice changed everything. James Connors, at 45, was what many regarded as the epitome of success in Silicon Valley. His high-rise office gleamed with expensive decor, offering a panoramic view of bustling streets, yet within him lingered a void that echoed louder than the applause that greeted his corporate achievements. He was trapped in a whirlwind of board meetings and strategy sessions, passions sacrificed on the altar of profitability. Each passing day, he felt like a ghost, haunting the halls of his own magnificently crafted life, an absent husband and father, emotions buried under layers of ambition. As deadlines loomed like storm clouds, James drifted past Ruth, the office janitor, her steady presence offering a momentary anchor in the chaos. He paused, compelled by the warmth in her smile amidst flickering fluorescent lights. "You know," she began, her voice gentle, "life's not all about what you achieve. It's about who you're there for when it matters." Initially dismissive, James's mind raced, questioning Ruth's wisdom. How could she possibly comprehend the intricacies of executive life, with its pressures and expectations? Yet, as she recounted her struggle as a single mother, stories of resilience, love, and community, the laughter and warmth of her memories contrasted sharply with the sterile, ruthless corridors of his world. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. With each drive home through the shimmering streets of San Francisco, the city's duality gnawed at him, the opulence shrouding dire inequality, leaving him unsettled. Ruth's words echoed. Was he truly a leader, or simply a figurehead in a constricting corporate machine? Just then, scandal erupted, a damning exposé on his company's unsavory labor practices, splashing across every media outlet. The world he meticulously built teetered on the brink of collapse, and with it, his identity. An ominous wave of anxiety washed over him as he observed employees protesting outside his glass fortress, their painted signs demanding dignity. Each beat of his heart intensified the existential crisis pressing against his ribcage. He was torn between preserving his empire and the growing moral obligation that Ruth's life lessons urged him to heed. What did it mean to lead with integrity when so much was at stake? With Ruth's voice as a beacon, he sought her out, unearthing wisdom from a life carved against hardship. But the looming fear of vulnerability held him hostage. Could he truly bear the burden of opening up? The weight of his past decisions threatened to crush him as he prepared for an imminent address to his employees. Standing at the podium, hands trembling, the silence around him grew deafening as he faced his own reckoning. Would he transform from a mere tycoon into a compassionate leader, or would he falter, swallowed by the very system that once buoyed his ascent? The air crackled with expectation, and just as he inhaled to speak, a single thought clamored for resolution. In this moment, everything hung in the balance. James inhaled sharply, his heart racing beyond the cadence of his thoughts. The gathered crowd of employees, clenching signs that screamed for justice, awaited his words. He had always prepared for speeches, crafting narratives and slick projections, but this moment was shaped not by strategic foresight but by raw urgency. The stakes were higher than any quarterly earnings report. This was about human dignity. What would he reveal? Would he feign ignorance, play the corporate game of damage control, or would he lean into the uncomfortable truths whispering in his mind? Memories of Ruth's gentle admonitions danced in his head. Life's not all about what you achieve. James felt an unfamiliar weight settle on his shoulders, a mixture of impending responsibility and latent courage. Today, I stand before you not just as a CEO, he began, his voice steady yet uncertain, but as a man who has lost sight of what truly matters. The silence enveloped him, drawing even deeper breaths as he dared to look into the faces of those he had overlooked for too long. There was disbelief, and slowly, he could sense the tension dissipate as curiosity replaced their initial hostility. Ruth wouldn't have let him off so easily. She would expect honesty that he continued, I have sacrificed the values that once drove me. As we scaled heights and expanded profit margins, I lost touch with the people behind the product, the lives behind the numbers. He paused, scanning the sea of mixed emotions. And as we enjoyed lavish victories, there were those among us feeling oppressed, and I didn't stop to listen. A murmur rippled through the crowd, uncertainty mingling with interest. Perhaps they sensed his sincerity, perhaps they were simply caught off guard by a leader willing to acknowledge failure. Each moment stretched taut between the past and the possible redemption that lay ahead. I want to change things. The audacity of the declaration flooded him with warmth. I want to build bridges, not walls. To champion the ones who feel unheard. As he spoke, a quiet resolve began crafting itself within him. Ruth's soft guidance urged him forward, and he could envision a new kind of leadership, not one steeped in power, but in partnership. Yet, doubt still lingered in his mind, wrestling with ambition. Would his board support such a dramatic pivot? Could he genuinely create a culture where vulnerability was not a weakness but a strength? Courage demanded that he embrace these risks, but fear whispered cautionary tales about failure. As he concluded, I am committed to instituting changes in our practices and engaging with all of you to rebuild this company from the ground up. A ripple of surprise coursed through the assembly. The road ahead felt perilous, teetering on the edge of transformative risk. He opened a dialogue for questions, his heart thumping as eyes locked onto him, grappling with new hope or skepticism. One voice rose through the quiet, sharp and penetrating. How can we trust you after all this? To answer would require introspection, a retrospective on his leadership so far, one defined by disconnection. Doubt pooled in his stomach, but something deeper stirred, resolve. He held the gaze of his questioner, the weight of Ruth's teachings unspooling in his mind. You can trust me when I prove that I am ready to listen and change. With those words, he knew he was at a crossroads, unsure of what lay ahead but driven by a new pulse of hope. Suddenly, it wasn't just about his reputation, it was about rebuilding a sense of community within the very fabric of his company. Yet as glimmers of potential danced in his mind, darker shadows loomed nearby. As the board was sure to retaliate, what measures would they take when confronted with his emerging vision? James couldn't shake the notion that the real battle was just beginning, lying in wait just beyond the glass walls of his sanctuary. James stood at the podium, the eyes of his employees burning into him like lasers, each one expectant yet reticent, as if they were trying to gauge his sincerity. He had thrown caution to the wind in that speech, and now he felt as exposed as a tightrope walker without a net. The question from the crowd still echoed in his mind, pushing against the boundaries he had built around himself. How can we trust you after all this? In the aftermath of his declaration, he had expected a revolution of sorts, an outpouring of gratitude, or at the very least a willingness to engage. But as he surveyed the crowd, he realized that their skepticism was not simply a byproduct of his past behavior, it was a barrier against the very change he sought to inspire. With each shifting gaze, he sensed the enormity of his task, a colossal mountain that loomed before him. James took a deep breath, fighting the urge to retreat back into his comfort zone, that familiar realm of profits and projections. Instead, he allowed the weight of accountability to settle over him. He needed to earn their trust, he couldn't simply assert it. Let's talk about accountability, he said, his voice carrying the gravity of his intent. I want you to hold me accountable every step of the way. I recognize that my past decisions have caused harm, and I cannot expect change to occur without your involvement. As he spoke, an urgent thought pierced through him. How would he operationalize this newfound commitment? Promises were easy, but actions were the currency of trust. He expressed his intent to form a council, a diverse group from all levels of the organization, that would serve not only as an advisory body but as a real mechanism for change. Together, we will evaluate our policies and practices. We will decide what our company should stand for moving forward, he declared, sensing the shifts in attitudes in front of him. There was a subtle rustle of hope as some employees started to lean in. What about the board? The thought clawed at him, creating a rift between ambition and anxiety. He envisioned their faces, disappointment curling their lips and disdain flickering in their eyes at his unambiguous betrayal of their profit-driven mindsets. Back in his office, the air felt thick with unresolved tension as he contemplated the countermeasures that his board would likely endure. They were stakeholders above all else. Would they support these initiatives? Would they see the vision he had seen, or would they label him a misguided dreamer? Determined to proceed, he devised a plan that included independent internal reviews experts to offer insights into workplace culture and employee engagement. He assessed the proposal on his desk, his fingers tapping the form lightly as an idea sparked in the back of his mind. This could serve as evidence of his commitment, a tangible step towards meaningful reform. Yet, lurking beneath his determination was an uninvited sense of paranoia. The board would see this as an affront, as a challenge to their power. Would he face pushback that could destabilize everything? Count on it, a voice in his mind sneered. They won't let you dismantle their empire without a fight. His resolve wavered momentarily. He could pull back, orchestrate a safer path, or he could charge forward into the unknown. The consequences of both scenarios played out vividly in his imagination, each fraught with risks and rewards that suffocated him with dread. Suddenly, he remembered Ruth's words again, courage isn't the absence of fear, but the resolve to move forward in spite of it. The realization settled into a comforting mantra, grounding him. Feeling emboldened, he navigated his next steps with gravity. Before the day ended, he would approach the board with his strategy. He would not simply inform them, he would invite them into this process as equal stakeholders, encouraging collaboration despite the uncertainty of their reaction. But even as he prepared for that confrontation, he knew deep down it was only the beginning. The resistance he anticipated had the potential to reveal not only hidden truths about himself but about the organization he had built. As he finished drafting the proposal for his board meeting, an unsettling thought crept into his mind. Was he prepared for the fallout of his decision? The time had come to face not only the board but the choices that had defined his leadership thus far. Would he be ready to withstand the scrutiny, ready to lead from a place of authenticity? James steeled himself. It was time to confront the real battle he had unknowingly unleashed. The boardroom felt cavernous, each echo adding to the tension that seemed to envelop James like a thick fog. He stood at the head of the polished table, a battleground laid out before him. Each board member sat with a look of guarded curiosity, their bodies poised for challenge. James could practically feel the invisible barriers erected over years of unchecked ambition and profit-driven indifference. With the proposal clutched in his hands, he took a moment to collect his thoughts. His heartbeat pounded in his ears as he recalled Ruth's resolute gaze, the janitor whose humble insights had sparked something within, pushing him to scrape away the layers of complacency he had previously embraced. The stark contrast between her world and his own had forced him to confront his beliefs and values. Her wisdom felt far more vital now than any shareholder meeting or quarterly report. "Thank you all for being here today," he began, aiming for a steady voice, yet the tremor betrayed him. "I stand before you not just as the CEO but as a fellow human being who recognizes deep flaws in our current culture." A ripple of surprise passed through the board, many trading glances that reflected skepticism and intrigue. James steadied himself, his predetermined words like a lifeline. "We have all felt the weight of our past decisions, some may even call them mistakes. It's time to pivot our focus." He outlined his plans meticulously, mentioning the formation of an employee council that would include voices from every level within the organization. As he spoke, he searched their faces for signs of support, yet found mostly narrowed eyes and crossed arms. His confidence teetered like a seesaw on a stormy day. "We want to create change from the top down," he pressed on, emphasizing the need for reform. "This must be a collective effort. I need your collaboration, not just as board members, but as advocates for a healthier workplace dynamic." The tension in the air thickened. Would they understand the magnitude of his intentions? Or would they balk at what they perceived as a challenge to their authority? He dreaded hearing objections. He could almost hear them forming in the silence. Then, as if on cue, the chairman, a man known for his astute assessments, leaned forward with a steely gaze. "James, this sounds commendable, yet it raises serious concerns. Our shareholders expect results. We cannot just dissolve the practices that have driven our success. Swallowed by the weight of his words, James felt his footing slip. I acknowledge that, he countered, heart racing. But what value are those results if they lead to a toxic work environment? We cannot sustain success in a house of cards built on fear. The board shifted uneasily, and James realized he had struck a nerve. The phrasing was risky, but he saw an opening to push harder. Trust is an invaluable asset. I'm asking for a chance to rebuild it, not only with our employees but with you. Each of you has a stake in this future. Another board member interrupted, her voice sharp. And if our changes do not yield the anticipated returns? What then, James? The audacity of the question hung heavy. Then we adjust. Flexibility is critical. If we fail to adapt, we cease to be relevant. The market is changing, and so must we. For a brief moment, the boardroom fell into silence, contemplating the gravity of his words. A flicker of uncertainty passed over the expressions of the members. Just as quickly, resolve settled back in, shielded by years of ingrained habit. James sensed a metaphorical wall being rebuilt, brick by brick. As their scrutiny intensified, a new wave of determination surged within him. James realized that this was a test not only of their belief in his vision but of his own capacity to lead authentically. He felt the stakes rise higher. This was no longer just about trust but about getting the board to reshape their perception of power itself. Could he navigate through their doubts and reshape their understanding of leadership? The outcome remained uncertain. With enough vulnerability and persistence, perhaps they would come to see the merit in his direction. His next words would be critical, an incantation of sorts aimed to shift their perspectives. I know this isn't easy. It requires belief in something untested, perhaps idealistic. But we can create an environment where employees flourish, which ultimately leads to our shared success. The walls might be constructed with the intention of self-preservation, but as the silence lingered, James remained resolute in facing whatever came next. Moments stretched into what felt like eternity. He silently reminded himself that sometimes the greatest risk was not taking one at all, and just as James prepared to hear their response, the chairman's hand lifted, signaling for silence once more. With the conclusion of their silent deliberation looming, anticipation surged through him. Would they dismiss him entirely or dare to align with this bolder vision of the future? The air crackled with tension, and James braced himself. The moment of truth had come, and with it, his leadership would be irrevocably tested. What choice would they make? Would he find allies in this fight for authenticity, or would they condemn him for his bravery? The chairman's hand fell, signaling an end to the deliberation, and a murmur spread through the boardroom. James's heart raced. He was deep in uncharted waters, and the ripples of discomfort were palpable. He braced himself for the wave that might crash upon him. James, said the chairman, his tone flat yet laced with the authority that had shaped the boardroom culture for decades. While your passion is evident, we operate by metrics that reflect our financial standing, not philosophical ideals. Your proposal fundamentally reshapes our approach, and change requires twice the certainty you're willing to offer. Each word felt like an arrow aimed directly at James's resolve. He had anticipated pushback, yet the weight of the chairman's words bore down on him harder than he had ever imagined. The battle he faced was not just about the future of the company, it was about his very identity as a leader. He inhaled deeply, forcing a calmness he did not feel. To continue living in the past is to suffocate creativity and innovation. The very metrics you value are rendered moot if our workforce is disengaged. We must forge a new path together. The board stirred, some audibly scoffing at his bravado. Their skepticism echoed in his mind, each doubt an echo of the past he wanted to dismantle. Yet, in that moment of uncertainty, he discovered something crucial within himself, a flicker of resilience ignited by the conversations he'd had recently, especially with Ruth. Her unassuming wisdom about integrity and openness ignited his passion anew and cast a light on the path forward. Ruth taught me that our worth as individuals isn't dictated by our titles or wealth but by our integrity and the respect we show one another. Imagine for a moment our company as a community rather than a mere revenue source, he continued, leaning forward as he emphasized his point. When we stand united, we become unstoppable. He felt an unfamiliar resolve settle within him, invigorating his ambitions and burying doubt progressively deeper. Could his naive wish of creating an inclusive workplace truly resonate with these seasoned business executives? The answer, he realized, rested with him. The CFO, a woman known for her cold calculations, interrupted, her voice cutting through the air like a knife. But what if this community falters, James? You speak of nurturing a culture, which is splendid, however, at what cost? If the forecast remains bleak, how do we justify these expenses to our stakeholders? We need to draw a line. It's precisely in the discomfort of ambiguity that growth emerges, James retorted, seizing a moment of clarity. I'm not asking for blind faith. I'm proposing a chance to redefine our legacy. Are we mere figures on a balance sheet, or a collective of minds capable of innovative solutions? His words hung in the air like an invocation, demanding contemplation. The tension in the room morphed into a charged atmosphere of possibility, albeit still veiled in uncertainty. Could his vision prime them for change, or would resistance remain immovably anchored? He locked eyes with the board members one by one. Pushing through the silence, he saw the flickers of hesitance, tiny embers of consideration igniting ever so slightly. He sensed the hesitation, and it inspired him, urging him to push even further. Change is uncomfortable but necessary, he said, his tone steadying with each word. This isn't about what has been, it's about what can be. We have an opportunity to evolve to lead in a direction that champions authenticity, balance, and genuine stakeholder engagement. His voice deepened with sincerity while his mind raced, recognizing that deep transformation would not come from demand alone. It required a shift in the entire board's commitment to a new reality. As murmurs of unease rippled through the room, James saw the tremors of a choice forming. Would they dismiss him outright or begin to entertain the possibility, however slim? Suddenly, he caught the eye of a board member who had remained silent, her expression contemplative. He felt a pulse of hope. While the others remained distant, she seemed to waver, discomfort but intrigued. James took a step forward, pressing his advantage. What I ask is not without risk, but I believe the reward real engagement and meaningful change will lead us to unprecedented heights. He paused, letting their collective uncertainty settle around him like electric charge in the air. The moment was utterly crucial, hanging in the balance. The boardroom door cracked open, revealing the hum of the outside world, a world of shifting paradigms and burgeoning possibilities, while inside, the atmosphere felt heavy with potential. Would conformity win out yet again, or would sparks fly from the flames of inspiration? James's heart surged at the thought of rebirth. What could they become together? He awaited their verdict with bated breath, acutely aware that the next few seconds could determine everything, a moment of revelation or a shattering of his nascent dream. James, the chairman began again, this time with a discerning tone. Let us take a moment to rethink our strategy. Perhaps there's a way to align both our visions. What was the path forward, and how would he navigate the unexpected shifts? A new chapter was beginning, but uncertainty still loomed large in James's journey ahead. As the chairman's voice trailed off, James felt the air shift. The mere glimmer of a potential reprieve ignited a spark inside him, an opportunity to be a driving force for change. It wasn't merely a chance to salvage the discussion, it was a critical moment that could define his leadership. Thank you for considering this, Chairman, James replied, masking the rush of adrenaline with a veneer of professionalism. I believe we can find a balance between our financial goals and a more engaged workplace. He could sense the undercurrent of skepticism still swirling among the board members, each one steadfast in their commitment to decades-old methodologies that had bred success. Yet the questions lingered in James's mind. Was stubborn adherence to the past the only path forward? Weighing his options, James planned his next move. He would need tangible examples to present, evidence that to nurture a culture was not just a lofty ideal. He could draw insights from the very underpinnings of his professional journey. His time spent near the bottom of the corporate ladder offered vital lessons. Stories of risk and reward. Insights from unassuming mentors. Reflecting on a janitor he used to chat with during his early years at the company, James recalled how she shared her approach toward life simply and honestly. Her wisdom had been a constant reminder that all roles were vital, every person contributed in ways that could be measured in inspiration rather than spreadsheets. He had to channel that perspective into something actionable. "I'd like to propose a pilot program," he began anew, harnessing the anticipation filling the boardroom. "Let us invite a small group of employees from different levels, those who shine in their roles and those who feel unseen, to explore how their experiences can shape our company culture. This can help us gauge where engagement can increase productivity and innovation." The CFO eyed him warily but refrained from interrupting. Sensing a moment of vulnerability and opportunity, James seized it. Picture this: a panel of employees serving directly to speak about their insights. It's crucial that we outline not only the mechanics of productivity but the emotional drivers behind it. We could gather data on employee morale, cultivate trust, and establish a feedback loop. With each word, James felt a thread of conviction thread through him, binding his ideas tighter. This wasn't merely an experiment, it was a lens through which the company could view itself anew. The murmurs resumed, but behind the quiet response was a sense of internal wrestling. He needed to provide something like a dare to wrestle the attention of decision-makers, a provocation for them to step into the unknown alongside him. "Let me bring in the voices of those who make our business run," he urged, searching the faces before him, desperately seeking those flickers of understanding. "Let us become more than just financial figures. We can reimagine our future. The stories of our employees hold the keys to bind our vision to tangible outcomes." A reflective silence filled the room, a crucible of ideas swarming through the board members' minds. James felt the weight of possibility settle upon him. But he also knew this was merely a stepping stone. He had to brace himself for the next waves of challenge that could follow from pushing too hard too soon. Suddenly, the CFO broke the silence, her tone assessing. "You believe that sentiment will translate into numbers? That People South voices will drive success on the books?" "Yes," he replied, determination rippling through him. "A company fueled by engagement isn't a utopian ideal, it's a competitive advantage. Studies confirm that well-structured employee engagement can lead to a 20% increase in profitability. This isn't just emotion, this is smart strategy." As their expressions turned pensive, James wrestled with the gnawing anxiety lurking below his surface. Would this pivot hold? The tension of the unknown loomed large. Within the momentary calm, he couldn't help but reflect. Who was he becoming in this fraught dialogue? A figure of potential change or a mere facilitator of discomfort? Then, the contemplative board member he noticed earlier broke her silence, her voice slightly wavering but resolute. "I see merit in this approach, James. The true question is, are you prepared for the inevitable pushback from our most entrenched decision-makers?" His heart raced anew, realizing the true depth of the journey ahead. "Yes," he replied, his voice sharpening, "but more importantly, are you?" And just like that, James understood the stakes had shifted. This was no longer only about him. It was about whether they would collectively embrace this vision. But a nagging thought lingered: what would they do if dissent solidified? And he found himself standing alone. As the room buzzed with scattered discussions, James braced himself. The battlefield of change was unfolding in real time. Would he rally this room of skeptics into a vision that resonated, or would he find himself merely anchoring an oversized dream to the very fabric of reluctance? Change was no longer a philosophical matter, it was an impending revolution. Uncertainty coursed through him with fiery urgency, and the path ahead lay cloaked in ambiguity, yet lit with the palpable tension of possibility. How far was he willing to go to drive this forward, and what sacrifices would remain unknown until they emerged in confrontation? The boardroom buzzed gently, an undercurrent of uncertainty mixed with tentative allure. Conversations flickered, each member grappling with their own internal debate. As attention wavered, James felt his heart hammering against his ribs, the weight of ambition crushed by the specter of doubt. He hadn't merely proposed a program, he had forged a bridge to an untested future, but the path was riddled with potential pitfalls. While he allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction at having ignited any discussion at all, he was quickly reminded of the very real risk of failure. What if this initiative crumbled before it even began? He knew that the greatest danger lay not just in opposition but in indifference. Would his peers be willing to take a risk, or would they retreat into the comfortable embrace of tradition, drowning out his call for change? James's fingers drummed against the table, his mind whirling. Each successive thought pointed to the same realization: he was standing in a precarious position, playing the role of a daring innovator amidst a sea of cautious colleagues. He envisioned each board member as a fortress, fortified with years of experience, entrenched knowledge, and prevailing metrics of success. With his proposed pilot program, he was trying to breach those walls, to instigate dialogue, but he needed to prepare for the inevitable counterattack. With renewed resolve, he drew a deep breath. Now was the time to enhance his strategy, to infuse his pitch with additional layers of substance. He considered the aspects of his own journey, where mistakes had been as instructional as victories. How could he translate those lessons into a compelling narrative for the board? Memories cascaded into focus. He thought of past miscommunications, the disjointed efforts he'd encountered that resulted in failures due to a lack of unity. Each experience molded his interpretation of leadership. He realized he had a powerful tool at his disposal: his own vulnerabilities. To lead authentically, he needed to weave his personal experiences into the fabric of his proposal, offering raw honesty as it permeated his speech. "I've faced failures," he began, his voice steady yet imbued with authenticity. "Early in my career, I was a part of teams that shoved aside the voices of those who contributed in unseen ways. I learned that not acknowledging every thread in the tapestry risks unraveling the whole picture. It taught me that there is no substitute for comprehensive perspectives. We must embrace the voices from all corners of our company." He watched as the room reacted. Eyes flickered, some softened and others hardened. Emotions began to surface as the narrative summoned a shared history of vulnerability among the seasoned faces. He pressed further, inviting camaraderie into the boardroom. "Let us be pioneers of a new methodology. Let us center our approach around real experiences and repercussions. This pilot isn't just about profitability, it's about crafting an environment where everyone feels valued, the very lifeblood of productivity. Can we not take the leap together?" His words hung heavily in the air, an echo of challenge. He was acutely aware of how he sounded, a mix of urgency and vulnerability. Was he making a spectacle of himself? Or was this the opportunity for genuine connection? One board member, who had remained quiet, leaned forward, her eyes alight with intrigue. "If we're going to navigate this together, James, we must define success. How will we measure the impact of an emotional engagement strategy? What will the key performance indicators be?" James felt a spark ignite within him. "That's precisely it. We'll establish tangible metrics: employee turnover rates, productivity levels, morale surveys. We'll harness qualitative data alongside the quantitative. In fact, the pilot group serves as a living case study, showcasing the intricate tapestry of our workforce insights and motivations." His confidence within shifted, coalescing into something firmer. The rhythm of the conversation pulsed under his skin, but darkness lurked around the edges. The board's dynamics were shifting, but a foreboding thought gnawed at him: could shifting alliances turn against him in the face of dissent? The dialogue surged forward with renewed vigor, ideas volleyed about, and slowly what had once felt like an uphill climb morphed into a collaborative exploration. Intrigued expressions pierced through his uncertainty, suggesting opportunity coaxed from reserved skepticism. As an air of camaraderie enveloped the room, James marveled at the growth unfolding before him, not just for the organization but within himself. He was transforming into a leader who conveyed authenticity and vulnerability rather than one merely mimicking the cold steel approach of traditional corporate methodology. Yet within this moment of unity, uncertainty lingered like a shadow. What if the hope he had forged here was merely temporary, easily crushed under the weight of institutional inertia? The stakes had transformed now. It wasn't solely about catching the board's interest, it was about solidifying his resolve to persist, even in the face of future opposition. As the discussion came to an electrifying halt, James felt the tide turn once more. The board's collective interest was piqued, but would their newfound enthusiasm withstand the challenges ahead? Could he navigate through the inevitable waves of resistance to establish a stronger foundation for change? Then, almost imperceptibly, the CFO's gaze tightened. "You're building momentum, but James, do know this: there will come a moment where you must defend your vision when it comes under fire. Are you prepared for the scrutiny that will follow?" That question unnervingly echoed in his mind like a premonition. The road ahead was fraught with uncertainties, and his next moves would demand him to be truly battle-ready. Driven by the heavy pulse of determination blossoming inside him, he braced himself, ready to confront whatever storm lay down that challenging path. What would he discover about his own capacity for resilience and influence as the tides shifted once more? James walked out of the boardroom with a cacophony of thoughts in his head. The exhilaration of igniting the conversation was quickly replaced by a mounting apprehension about the implications of success. He had positioned himself on a precarious ledge, and each step forward felt as risky as it was necessary. The world outside buzzed with life, people hustling along the streets, the crisp wind tousling his hair, yet he felt encased in an emotional vacuum. The board's interest had been a breakthrough, but that breakthrough demanded responsibility. He needed to prepare not for celebration but for the inevitable scrutiny, the critique that would come with innovating in a landscape resistant to change. He sank into his office chair, surrounding himself with the familiar chaos of papers and project markers, as if to ground himself in reality. James opened a notebook, its pages filled with ideas and reflections penned over the weeks of contemplation preceding his proposal, the sketches of his hopes, fears, and, ultimately, his strategies. He began to write again, this time focused on preparing for expected challenges rather than on celebrating newfound enthusiasm. How would he address the impending doubts from those less enthusiastic about change? This was not merely about presenting a new initiative, it was an invitation for an entirely different conversation, a departure from the predictable playbook that most were accustomed to. As he scribbled down counterarguments, he recalled the tense exchanges with his colleagues. They had peppered him with questions, and now, he painstakingly plotted their potential responses. By familiarizing himself with their concerns beforehand, James aimed not just to counter them but to bridge understanding. It was a strategy aimed at empathy, grasping the emotions behind resistance rather than viewing them solely as obstacles. That evening, James decided to grab dinner at a local diner, seeking solace in its homely atmosphere. The scent of grilled cheese sandwiches intertwined with the distant sound of clinking dishes. Normalcy surrounded him, yet he felt isolated in contemplation. He realized that part of his challenge ahead lay within him, his own vulnerability mirrored in the faces he would soon confront. In a moment of clarity, he recalled a janitor he frequently encountered in the building, an older woman named Ruth. Her words, though few, had always seemed to carry an inexplicable depth. Perhaps she possessed a wealth of wisdom shaped by her own experiences, insights gleaned from individuals at the periphery. That thought nagged at him. He had gathered much from his colleagues, but was there something unique he could learn from someone with an entirely different vantage point? The next day, he made a point to find her while she cleaned the floors. She was bent over, methodically scrubbing a spot as he approached. "Hey, Ruth," he began, hesitance lacing his words, "can I talk to you for a minute?" Surprised but warmly welcoming, she straightened up, nodding, "Of course, James. Everything all right?" James hesitated, then decided honesty was the best approach. "Actually, I could use your perspective on something important. It's about change, and I think you see things differently than the other people in the boardroom. Can I get your thoughts?" Her eyes sparkled with curiosity, and she motioned for him to sit on a nearby bench, the cleaning supplies forgotten for a moment. As she spoke, James absorbed the narrative of resilience embedded in her stories, tales of people brushing against doubt yet deciding to push through nonetheless. She imparted wisdom in bite-sized phrases about listening as an art form, about the power of simplicity amidst the chaos of corporate strategies. Sometimes, she said, all the glitter doesn't mean it's gold. The real treasures are often those small changes that feel risky, but they push people to see each other more clearly. Her words pierced through him like an enlightened realization he'd been so focused on hard metrics and strategies that he had forgotten the core of his proposal, to connect human experiences within the framework of the organization. James left the diner revitalized, his mind racing with new ideas as he returned to his workspace. Embracing this moment of revelation, he knew he needed to reflect these insights in his next presentation. It would now include both a robust strategy backed by metrics and a narrative that captured the essence of every individual affected by the proposed changes, but doubts loomed on the horizon as he prepared for the next meeting. Would those in the boardroom accept not only the numbers but the stories behind them? The precarious nature of his journey weighed heavily on his shoulders, yet with every pulse of apprehension came the flicker of hopeful determination. What if he could transform fear into motivation, not just for himself but for others? The idea rested like a stone in his gut, propelling him toward the unknown journey that stood before him. A chilling thought dawned: would the board even accept his new approach when they realized how deeply he'd woven vulnerability into the fabric of his vision? James faced a moment of truth. Was he prepared to transparently defend his newly enriched proposal against the very thing that had ignited his initial fears? The time was drawing near. James stood before the mirror in his office, rehearsing the words that felt simultaneously empowering and terrifying. The polished glass reflected not just his physical form but the burgeoning resolve flickering within him, a flicker he had seldom acknowledged until now. He adjusted his tie, a symbolic gesture of preparation, yet the knot of anxiety tightened around his chest. The boardroom loomed like a temple of scrutiny. He imagined the faces of his colleagues, their skepticism and disbelief palpable. What if they didn't embrace the emotional undercurrents he now intended to weave into the presentation? Did he have the capacity to challenge their ingrained assumptions? He recalled Ruth's stories, the rich texture of her insights, the significance of the everyday lives she had encountered while cleaning their floors. Those narratives had unearthed a simpler truth beneath the complexities of business speak: connection. They were reminders that the human experience thrived in the cracks of corporate protocol. But just as soon as that realization bolstered him, doubt flooded back. Had he understated the practicality of his proposal by emphasizing empathy? Would the metrics of success not translate without a cold, hard focus on data-driven decisions? Walking to the boardroom, he grappled with these conflicting thoughts, fighting the urge to throw caution to the wind. But what if this intertwining of narrative and strategy was precisely what was needed? A moment of uncertainty froze him mid-step. He had read somewhere that vulnerability could foster deeper connections. Would it resonate here? As he entered the room, the air thickened with anticipation. Eyes turned toward him, their expressions ranging from curious to critical. James took a breath and steadied himself, grounding in the knowledge he had garnered from Ruth. His body may have felt small, but his purpose shone bright. The projector flickered to life, and slides of bold graphs and figures filled the screen, momentarily drowning out his thoughts. He began outlining the plain facts, the data that lay at the heart of his proposal. Yet reverberating in the background was a reminder of the warmth behind each figure, the stories that reflected lives intertwined with the statistics. While our numbers tell a story, he began, his voice gaining strength, they don't capture the human impact we need to consider. Change isn't just driven by what we can quantify, it's felt in the everyday experience of our team, our clients, and our community. He spoke deliberately, channeling Ruth's essence with each phrase. The initial flickers of curiosity began to show on a few faces, but a shadow of skepticism remained in others. What about the risks associated with this more human-centered approach? One board member interjected, crossing his arms. Every risk has the potential for reward, James replied, adrenaline coursing through him. Isn't it true that many innovations in our industry arose from understanding a human need that went unaddressed? Embracing vulnerability doesn't equate to weakness, it can spur creativity and foster collaboration. As the discussion unfolded, James found himself leaning deeper into the emotional fabric of his proposal, gradually pulling anecdotes from Ruth's insights into the conversation. He observed their reactions, some were nodding, while others struggled against the weight of their entrenched beliefs. The meeting dragged on, and he felt an emerging rhythm, a dance between data and narrative. Even in the face of resistance, he continued to push back against the fear of vulnerability. By finding the courage to embody the very essence of change he sought, he noticed a softening among some board members. He sensed connection being forged, in real time, amidst the doubts. But just as he felt he was cutting through barriers, the board chair interjected, his brow furrowed, "But this isn't just about feelings, James. It's about tangible outcomes. Are you confident we can afford to embark on this path?" The air crackled with tension, and James felt the return of uncertainty, the panic starting to creep in. Yet, amid that noise, a single thought crystallized: discipline in vulnerability could redefine their outcomes. With renewed fervor, he continued, "We can recalibrate our metrics to include not only quantitative results but qualitative shifts in team morale. The two elements can coexist symbiotically. Fostering a culture that encourages risk-taking in the face of change could yield unprecedented innovation." As the meeting came to a close, James felt a pulsating blend of hope and apprehension merging within him. Would they embrace this new narrative? Might it indeed bear fruit, blending the raw humanity of connection with the analytical aspect of their work? Walking away, he knew the battle was far from over. He had nudged the door open, but how many would step through it alongside him? As he stared out the window into the bustling streets below, his thoughts swirled with a new realization. Perhaps the most harrowing challenge lay ahead: could he maintain the momentum of this shift, continue to invite others into the depth of vulnerability without retreating into the safety net of numbers alone? Could he coalesce not just as a strategist, but as a leader who embodied the fear and exhilaration of embracing the unknown? The time would come to clarify his values and the vision he had begun to illuminate. But first, he needed to confront the reality of potential failure or acceptance in this complex journey ahead. James Connors stood confidently in front of the large window of his office, the weight of the world outside blending seamlessly with the weight of the decisions that loomed overhead. The sun dipped low in the horizon of San Francisco, casting a golden light that reflected the potential he now embraced. After presenting his transformative vision to the board, the subsequent weeks unfolded much like a delicate dance. He had anticipated backlash, yet what unfurled was a potent shift not just within the boardroom, but within himself. In the aftermath of his proposal, James intentionally sought collaboration instead of conflict. He connected with his employees on a personal level, far beyond his previous quarters of sterile data and profit margins. Ruth's wisdom became the bedrock of this new chapter. Her insights reminded him that the true drivers of change thrived in dialogues of empathy and mutual respect. They outlined a community where every voice was valued, tethering respected metrics with the stories behind the numbers. The initiatives he implemented included monthly town halls, an employee feedback council across all levels of the company, and an innovative mentoring program that fostered connections among staff. When the board initially braced for resistance, they soon recognized palpable excitement in the workforce. Enrollment in the mentoring program surpassed expectations, fostering deep-rooted connections that galvanized productivity. Employees found their voices and shared their narratives, something that had been missing for too long. Then, as months rolled on, tangible recognition followed. Employee turnover rates dropped by 35%, and productivity soared by 20%. Not only did they measure success in financial growth, but they also continuously monitored employee satisfaction through pulse surveys. Ruth's insights had elucidated a previously neglected perspective on success. They achieved far more than profit. They cultivated a thriving workplace culture where individuals contributed uniquely to the shared vision. James stood in front of a packed auditorium, now filled with familiar faces imbued with energy. The mid-year company-wide meeting radiated an atmosphere of possibility and progress. As he stepped forward to address them, he reflected on his transformation since encountering Ruth and confronting the realities of leadership. No longer was he just a figurehead executing strategies, he was a nurturing advocate for authenticity within the workplace. Today, we celebrate not just our growth in numbers but each individual's contribution to this journey, he began, his heart steady. As he looked out into the crowd, he saw hope, a once distant feeling that had blossomed into reality. Together, we've created a culture that thrives on engagement. Each of you has embraced vulnerability, and in that embrace, we all grew stronger. A ripple of applause surged through the room, melding into a crescendo as employees rose to their feet. Their enthusiasm mirrored the culmination of months of hard work, shared burdens, and a collective commitment to redefining success. James felt a warmth swell within him. He grasped that the real victory lay not in accolades but in the relationships forged, the trust rebuilt. In that moment, he realized he had conquered more than just the boardroom. He had dismantled the confines of his own fears and insecurities. His path had transformed from one steeped in ambition and performance metrics to one rooted in a profound understanding of humanity. The corporate machine that had once consumed him became a platform for fostering relationships where compassion was no longer set aside for profits, but woven intricately into their very fabric. As the applause echoed, James smiled genuinely. He took a deep breath, savoring the moment, a moment that represented not just individual achievement but a monumental shift in organizational culture. He had become a leader who could showcase vulnerability as strength, embracing truth in leadership as an asset rather than a liability. With each passing day, James continued to nurture the culture he had dreamed of, penning initiatives for continued engagement, valuing mentorship, and fostering inclusivity. Concrete achievement didn't stem from a singular moment in a boardroom, it flourished in the small, everyday affirmations of respect he gifted to each employee, now flourishing under his care. As he left the stage, James paused at the doorway, glancing back at the faces beaming up at him, knowing they were in this together. He felt confident, fulfilled, and recognized not for traditional markers of achievement but for successfully redefining what it meant to lead with integrity. The journey ahead excited him. His confidence was revitalized through the narratives each employee shared, the authentic connections he had forged, and the trust he would work to nurture further. His role as a leader had become not just a position, it's a shared vision for a brighter future. He recognized that he had become the CEO he always aspired to be, one who could define success not solely through financials, but by fostering a community where every voice mattered. Now, it's your turn to embark on your own journey of transformation. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm. Comment your reactions and theories about the ending. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. You need to subscribe now because this is the moment to show your support. Don't wait even one more second to share. Only true fans of personal overcoming stories understand the importance of supporting the channel through these actions.